Hi, I'm Doug Woodward, Prophecy in the News. I'm your host today. I am pleased to be in the studio today with my friend, writer, syndicated radio host, speaker, lecturer, general good guy, Paul McGuire. Paul, welcome back.
It's great to be on your program, and it's great to be back here on Prophecy in the News.
Thank you. We appreciate it so much. Well, you have written, I'm going to hold this version up. I have an early version here, but I'm going to hold this one up. This is the hardback. This is the book. This is one we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a small slice of this book because there's so much in it. You can't cover it in one show, so we're going to talk probably through several shows about things in this book. But it's really dealing with the issue of Donald Trump, the impact that he's having. A lot of it is I would guess you'd say the interplay between evangelicals, what they're thinking about last days. How does Trump fit into that scenario? So is that kind of how you would say that that's sort of a key part of what the book's about?
Yes, and as you know, Trumpocalypse was authored by myself and Troy Anderson, a Pulitzer Prize nominated journalist. We've teamed up before on the Babylon Code. The reason the book is called Trumpocalypse is because it deals with what we will believe is going to be an explosion of synergistic events, which is kind of a contradiction in terms. But on one hand, we have the deep state, we have the intelligence community, we have the global elite that controls the deep state, and the global elite that controls all the mainstream media, just like George Orwell predicted in 1984 with his thought beliefs and Big Brother.
The Ministry of Truth.
Right, the Ministry of Truth. And as you know, Doug, the Ministry of Truth is a very pathological liar. Because nothing they say, you know, when Trump calls them fake news, they are fake news. And actually Trump is being very gracious by that term.
Well, I think in your book you even have surveys that talk interestingly about how many Americans nowadays trust the media. And it's interesting that while surprisingly still 28% of Democrats trust the media, I think the statistic is like only 9% of Republicans trust the media. So they're probably not turning on our friends at CNN too much.
No, and probably if we did a further detailed study of the 28% of Americans who trust the mainstream media, it would be interesting to know what percentages of those people are on antipsychotic drugs.
Oh, we're going to get there in a little while. But first, that's okay. Where I want us to go a little bit is a particular chapter in the book. It talks about the deep state coup and the occult explosion. So I want to talk about how some of the sort of paranormal things that are going on, or the interest that the elite and the leaders of our country have in the occult, and how that's influencing events kind of behind the scenes, and sometimes they sort of bleed out into the public. Good example of this, and this is kind of where we'll begin, is what could be called the Julian Assange October surprise, where he has, you know, he released hundreds, if not thousands, of memorandums that were going on. Somehow he got these from the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, and in those emails, many things were embarrassing to Hillary Clinton that were in those emails, but of particular interest is the whole issue of John Podesta and what became known as Pizzagate or Pedogate. So I wanted you to kind of begin with that and talk about your sense of what that's telling us about the leaders in Washington and so forth. This whole issue of pedophilia and all that. It's a horrible thing, and yet we kind of have to talk about it.
We have to talk about it because none of us, including myself, and I'm sure yourself, this is a very uncomfortable subject, but we need to know the truth. Jesus Christ said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." The reality we know from Julian Assange's emails that he distributed and other information. And this is something that's very hard. It's hard for us to Americans to embrace this because we're trusting, okay? In Europe, they've been dealing, the European kings and prime ministers, et cetera, have been dealing with this problem for centuries. But here's cutting to the chase. The reality is, in America, we do have a hidden, invisible shadow government, if you will. We have an invisible power structure that some people call the deep state, and we go into the history of the deep state in Trumpocalypse. But this almost sounds like something between a science fiction novel and Stephen King or whatever.
Right. Yeah, it's a horror story, isn't it?
It's a horror story, but the most horrible thing, as you know, is it's true.
Right.
And there's a trail of verifiable, impeccable evidence that proves it's true.
Well, in fact, just I'll add this and then let you continue. That what's been interesting, and we'll talk more about the whole issue of how did they come about those memos. Was it hacking of the Russians, that caused those memos to get to Julian Assange and so forth? But the point is that issue, the issue of how it happened, how it was hacked, has become the focal point. What was said in the memorandum has never been denied.
Correct.
And it gets into, in fact, I'll have you comment even further about spirit cooking, Marina Abramovic, and the elites and the Hollywood people that have gotten into this whole occult thing.
Right.
And that this is really at the forefront, at least for those of us that are studying these things.
Right.
We're aware of it. It's not something the mainstream media, of course, will talk about at all.
No, and that's why they are fake news, because they're not talking about perhaps the single most important story in America right now and for the last 30 years. And that is simply this. They're at the very highest levels of government, culture, entertainment, media, politics, both in the United States and Europe. There currently exists and has existed for at least 30 or 40 years at a very high level, and a largely hidden network of practicing pedophiles. This is true. This is not, a tabloid.
I can confirm it with my own study, and I've written about it in some of my books as well.
Good.
Yep.
So there's a network of pedophiles, but it's worse than that.
Yes.
Because pedophilia, not all the time, but when you see high-level officials involved in pedophilia, it's usually a clue of satanic worship and participation in Satanism.
Yes.
Going back to these emails that Assange released. Now, I wasn't there. I don't know whether they occurred or not. Assange claims they're true. Many, many experts claim they're true. This is not flaky.
There have been no, like I said, no denials. No, there was no spirit cooking dinner.
Right.
No, that's not. They absolutely shown pictures. They've talked about it. They've described it, and yet no one's denied that Podesta and his brother Tony were into this occult
practice,
action, this ritual.
Okay, so I'm going to try to say this as quickly as possible, and please understand, I am not trying to offend you. I am not trying to be prurient in any sense of the word. I would really rather not talk about this, but I would be failing as an American citizen.
And as a Christian, we are to shine light into the dark acts of men.
And as a Christian, I would be failing you if I didn't tell you this. But there are, as we said, high-level people who belong to a satanic network. They're satanic practicing Satanists. And one of the things that they're into, and I'm sorry to say this, I have no, I don't even want to talk about this, but we explain it in Trumpocalypse. But here's the thing. They abuse children emotionally, psychologically, and very brutally, sadistically, including murder, in their sexual rape and torture and mutilation of these young children. Yes. And it's a global phenomenon.
It is. It's certainly been all through the ages. As you said, it's been part of satanic rituals.
Exactly.
Let's bridge to that then to the phenomenon known as SRA, DID, and MKUltra.
Okay.
Right?
Yes. Very good.
Just let's define SRA. What do these acronyms stand for? SRA, DID, and MKUltra. What is that?
Well, this is very important, and we bring it out in Trumpocalypse because you see, when you investigate the real biography of the deep state and the real biography of the intelligence agencies, I'm not saying all intelligence people are Satanists or evil. No. Please don't misconstrue what I'm saying. But we're talking about a small percentage. But when you go back, especially to the end of World War II, when Allen Dulles, the first head of the CIA, who was hired by Rockefeller, I believe the turning point, which we referred to in Trumpocalypse, was when our government brought in 10,000 Nazi rocket scientists, mind control scientists, and genetic scientists who were Satanists.
Operation Paperclip.
Operation Paperclip. They brought in 10,000. And then they began to do these brutal experiments that they had already started on the concentration camp prisoners in Germany.
Yep.
One, as you just referred to, the most famous one was MK Ultra, which produced the Manchurian Candidate Assassin program, where they took LSD, they would break apart a man's mind or a woman's mind and program them to be an assassin.
Right.
But as you know, Doug, from your own research and writing in books, and we deal with it in our earlier book too, the Babylon Code, this stuff came from the Satanism of Aleister Crowley, the great Satanist.
Yep.
And as you know, Aleister Crowley was an agent for British intelligence spying on Hitler in World War II. Well, the tragedy is that these very, very bad guys, Satanists and I don't even want to, unspeakables, not the deplorables.
Right, not the deplorables.
Right, the deplorables are the
proudly have the badge deplorable.
Right, the deplorables are the hardworking Americans, middle class, working class of all ethnic groups who believe in God and the family and equity and all that kind of stuff. These are monsters. They're living monsters.
Yes.
Because they shatter a human mind. They program people to be assassins or sex slaves. But here's the important part. It is rooted in occult Satanism and Luciferianism. In other words, it is a science. It's this modern science of neuropsychiatric mind control, but its roots go directly into the satanic rituals of Crowley, the secret societies like Vril and Thule who put Adolf Hitler in power.
Right.
And the question is, how many of these men and organizations, very powerful, very wealthy, are part of the deep state and secretly running America? Right. How many are? Let's just speculate. I don't have the answer. I'm certainly not saying every mass shooting had some weird thing. I'm not. I believe in the FBI. I thank God for our CIA. But look, there's some strange stuff going on. I mean, you would have to be a psychotic to turn the channels of TV and say, this behavior, it almost seems orchestrated. I don't know if it is or isn't.
Yeah, to kind of bring it back to the media and to the interplay of the media with this sort of top layer, as they say, the 7th floor of the FBI building, the Hoover building, the top layer or a compartment within the CIA that has been doing these kinds of nefarious deeds since really really back into the 1950s.
Yes,
it was brought out and made public in congressional hearings.
Right, like the church hearing.
The church hearing and the Pike Committee, that was also at the same time, 1975. And again in 1995, when Clinton, they had hearings on the use of radiation and the unwitting impact upon various populations. Because the government it's documented, do testing on American citizens.
Right.
So just, it's astounding stuff. All of this stuff is coming to the surface.
Yes.
And let's talk for just a second, and then we'll take a break, but let's talk for just a second. Explain, I think there's sort of 2 layers of the deep state. Because the mass media will still talk about the deep state, but they're kind of talking about the more public or visible deep state, but there is a deeper state. So talk a minute about that, if you would, and distinguish that.
Okay, first of all, the mainstream media, which is owned by just 6 globalist elite corporations, is totally controlled, and basically, with few exceptions, they manufacture disinformation. They do not give full disclosure when they say, oh, the deep state are these bad guys in the CIA and the FBI. No, that is not the deep state. The deep state is far deeper than corruption at the upper levels of intelligence or law enforcement agencies. The deep state is the Hydra. It's the head of the octopus. It's this international network of intelligence agencies, spies, multinational corporations, the wealthiest people in the world, and they control, let's say, intelligence agencies or NATO or British intelligence or the CIA or whatever.
Right.
These groups, I'm not saying all of them. I'm not making a blanket statement and saying all of the FBI and CIA or whatever are bad. But they're controlling a great deal of it for this end. They want to bring in, and this is what we drive home in Trumpocalypse, they want to bring in the one world government, one world religion, and one world economic system prophesied in the Bible, and they're doing it by manufactured crisis or order out of chaos.
Or in false flags, more sort
false
of
flags.
generically.
Exactly.
So let me take a break and tell our audience a bit about the book. As you can tell, there is some provocative information, and we're just dealing with a slice right now of about 20 pages in the book, in one of the chapters. But Trumpocalypse is extremely timely. What struck me as I was reading this was that the timeliness of this, it's more like a weekly magazine, you know, because it's so current with what's going on, what's happening in Washington, what's happening in geopolitics and so forth. So, but it's really dealing with, as we're talking about, the influences that are sort of surrounding Donald Trump, and even influences not just the media, but these deep, dark influences. So we want to offer this book to you, our audience, for $24.95, and then we also want to provide another special offer, the Babylon Code, a book that Paul and Troy wrote just prior to this book. We want to offer this book as well for $23.95, and then the two together as a package. We'd like to offer that to you for a discount of $44.95. So anyway, look on your screen. You'll see reference to the web store as well as a phone number that you can call to be able to order these books. And I strongly encourage you to do so. I've been reading them fiercely and rereading them as I'm inclined to do, because these guys have so much to say and they write it so very, very well. Let's talk about, we're going to stay kind of with this theme still of this sort of deep occultism. One of the things that's happened that's been kind of shocking is a result of the war in Syria, and it's the arch from Palmyra.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was damaged or destroyed by ISIS, but it was in effect rebuilt, recreated. There was a ritual almost, or a meeting, a memorial almost type of service in New York, in London, and the third was in Florence, Italy.
Yeah.
Florence, Italy. So talk a little bit about the significance of this monument to Baal being brought to the public's attention at this moment in time.
Well, you're right, and we spend a lot of time in Trumpocalypse going over this, and this is the reason why. The very fundamental truth of the Bible, that there's a battle between good and evil, there's a battle between God and Satan, and that we're in the last days, okay, is a reality. We are in the last days. Nobody knows when that is, but the battle between God and Lucifer is escalating. Now, this arch of Baal, and Baal was simply a god that the ancients worshipped. They worshipped the god Baal. He was a figure of Satan. And the particular way they worshipped him is they would gather around a statue of Baal, and they would heat up sometimes the hands of the statue of Baal till they were red, white hot, and they would burn their children alive in worship to Baal, which represented Satan, in order to get Baal's favor of blessing in crops.
Right.
Now, if people say, well, that's weird, that's demonic, that doesn't happen anymore. Well, go to the Bohemian Grove, which I've gone to, and I was very, very careful about where I walked and where I did not walk, because I did not want to disappear.
Right.
I'm laughing because it's playing back in my head.
Exactly. Yeah.
I learned something once. When you don't see overt security and you're in a very high security area, you better watch it. Yeah. Because when I was standing outside the Council on Foreign Relations, I didn't see any visible security, but I knew there was security.
You were being watched.
Exactly. Right. So we look at, they have the owl, Moloch, and Moloch is a substitute name for Baal, Satan, and they have a mock worship of offering mock babies in effigy to the satanic god of Moloch. And we have presidents. We have Ronald Reagan.
Right.
We have Henry Kissinger. We have the world's most powerful presidents, politicians, and world leaders. Now, if at the very least they're gathering in a party, and some people say there are orgies going on the side, but at the very least they're conducting a mock ceremony of burning human babies alive on the statue of Moloch or Baal that represents Satan. What kind of men are these that even in pretending, even in a fantasy world, even like a golf game or miniature golf, in their pretend moments while they're drinking whatever they're drinking, they're pretending to sacrifice human babies that are being burnt alive on the altars of Moloch. And then you talked about the most important thing is they imported the statue and not the statue, the archway of Baal that represents Satan from an ancient civilization, and they imported it to Times Square, New York. A worship shrine to Satan is in New York City, Manhattan. It's in London. It's in other cities of the world. What that's telling you, if you're not asleep, the Bible says, beware, sleeper, wake up and rise from the dead. The Holy Spirit is speaking to his church. The problem is his church is sleeping and in slumber, and in their slumber the thief is about to come and take everything you have. So back to this Baal worship, the elite are now, there's no more pretense. Stanley Kubrick talked about it in the film Eyes Wide Shut. They're revealing the fact in the open, in their brazenness and their boldness. In the the music videos, Beyonce and all the rest, Illuminati imagery, satanic imagery. And you talked about spirit cooking. Very important. We talk about it in Trumpocalypse. For those of you that don't know what spirit cooking is, and I did thorough research on this, and I know you did too, this is when a satanic high priestess, it's commonly done in New York among the elite, they will paint pictures. The Podestas were allegedly involved in this. Pictures of children, perhaps nude, and they, excuse me for being offensive, but this is what the elite do. They paint their pictures in semen, blood, urine, and menstrual fluid. And that's in Aleister Crowley, the great Satanist. It's a satanic rite. So some of you need to wake up and smell the coffee and recognize that we are in a spiritual battle for the heart and soul of mankind. Donald Trump is an act of divine reprieve by Almighty God. And instead of criticizing him, maybe you need to have a lightning bolt struck into your head and say, my God, since all the world's elite are in alliance against him, threatening to assassinate him, what is he doing that's so evil? He's going to expose them.
Let me bring you back to the context, because you talk about Mystery Babylon. So what Trump is up against is not just the establishment, not just up against the leftists and the Democratic Party, not just the media, not just Hollywood, not just the late night talk show hosts that beat him up every night for 10 minutes to start their shows. There's this spiritual thing going on behind the scenes the Bible talks about, Mystery Babylon. And you talk about that. Talk a little bit about the context of this. You've got about 3 minutes to do this. To talk about Mystery Babylon, how that fits into where Donald Trump is right now and what the significance of what he is in light of Mystery Babylon.
Excellent question. Mystery Babylon is the one world government, one world religion, one world economic system that God warns about, not only in Genesis 11, but in Revelation 17 and 18. God says Mystery Babylon will return in the last days. It's a corrupt Luciferian system. Everything that we just talked about was evidence of the rising of Mystery Babylon. But God told these people in his word, which we talk about in Trumpocalypse, that God's people are not to be taking a nap as Satan and the Luciferian powers rise. We're to obey Jesus Christ, who said, occupy the land, in our case it's America, until I come. We're to be faithful to preach the gospel, to pray for both Democrats and Republicans, to be salt and light, and most of all, above everything else, in Revelation it says, and there's a whole list of sins that keep you out of heaven. Cowardice and being a coward is the #1 sin. So my challenge humbly is to every pastor, man and woman in America who names the name of Christ, are you being a coward by being silent, or are you willing to be identified as a man or woman for God? The choice is yours.
Absolutely. There's a couple of quotes I wanted to read. One, very succinct statement: Trump is one of the few politicians who is at war with globalism. And globalism, as I think you would define it, is very closely related to Mystery Babylon.
It is. Globalism is Mystery Babylon.
Yes. And so we have a couple of minutes left. One of the questions that often comes up, and I want to get, there's a quote, if you may not recall it, but I'll bring it to your attention. How much does Trump know about the Illuminati? Some say, well, he's part of the Illuminati, that his rising to power was, that was planned, and this whole thing was a charade, and they really wanted Trump in. That's kind of the minority view. The majority view, especially amongst evangelicals, is that no, this seems to represent, as you said, a reprieve. But I guess the question, and take a minute or so to answer if you would, is does Trump understand the Illuminati? Does he know about these things? What do you think?
I think, first of all, if you believe Trump's part of the Illuminati, you need your software upgraded, because the Illuminati are trying to kill him.
Yeah.
Second of all, we have a very arrogant media elite. I'm from the East Coast, and I know how arrogant the liberals can be, because I grew up a liberal. Trump is far wiser and far more astute about the Illuminati, the secret societies, the snake pit of the intelligence agencies trying to take him down. Don't underestimate Donald Trump. He isn't necessarily saying with his words everything he knows, but the man is highly intelligent, genius level IQ, and see, they're trying to demonize and marginalize
Absolutely.
him. He knows what's happening, and,
Yes.
and before he decided to run for the president, he knew what he was up against.
Yeah. I found this intriguing. There was a point that you made that I think gives us a bit of documentation that he understands, and we'll close the show with this. But there's a American businessman named Robert Kiyosaki, and the quote here is, "The Illuminati began as a secret society under the direction of Jesuit priests." Well, the issue of Jesuit priests and their relationship to globalism is another story. But what's interesting about this guy, Robert Kiyosaki, is that he co-authored the book with Donald Trump, Why We Want You to Be Rich.
Yeah.
So do you think while they were writing the book they might have talked about some of these things?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I think that you can rest assured that Trump does understand that what he's up against is spiritual.
Yes.
It's not just physical or intellectual. So we are about out of time. So we encourage you to consider getting a copy of the book, to study up, and to play your part in speaking out. And so until we see you next time, keep looking up.
Amen.